Hello, hello. Happy hump day. You know, hump day is my favorite day. Hi, 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 hi. Welcome back. We have a lot to go through today. I have about 6 lives scheduled and we're going to bust right through them, baby. We're going to do it. I hope you guys are having a good day. Thank you for being here. Hello, I am Melly. Welcome all new viewers, subscribers, friends, babelets, haters, and members, most of all. I'm working on members only content, so keep your eye out for that. We have a whole week of a lot of true crime coming up. So please turn on your notifications, hit the like button, do all the YouTube thingies, subscribe to the second channel. I am trying to grow it over there. We will be having a late night live over there tonight. And definitely check the schedule for the lives because I have about 5 planned out for today. So let me say hi to everyone. We're going to get into the Washington State University lawsuit on behalf of Steve Goncalves as a personal representative for the estate of 𝗕𝗥𝗔𝗜𝗡𝗦 Goncalves, who is a personal representative of Madison May Mogan, Jeffrey Kernodle, who is Xana's dad, and 𝗕𝗥𝗔𝗓𝗡𝗦, who is Ethan's personal representative mom. So that's the Idaho 4 case. It's a pretty long document and we're going to have to do a part 2. It's about, I think, 126 pages. And I have actually done 126 pages in full on the live about corruption within Fulton County jail. So definitely I can do it, but I don't want it to be an overload of information. So I will probably do part 2 tomorrow, and I will link all the sources once I update thumbnails and descriptions tonight. This was recently filed, and I have the unhighlighted, unedited, or reviewed version, but I have a version that was reviewed by someone who's really familiar with the case. Her name is Jules. I'll link her channel in the description. And she does a lot of coverage on Idaho, and I really like her coverage on it. And I find that she's reliable, and she went through and highlighted it. There's a lot of controversy behind this because some of the things aren't in this lawsuit apparently aren't adding up or are contradictory to things in police reports and etc. So she actually went through and highlighted and made notes. So we're going to use that version of the document. So like I said, it is pretty lengthy. We'll probably get about half of it today, and then I'll make a part 2 tomorrow. I saw Alsane in here. I saw Debbie. Hello, hello. I saw Irony. I saw hello, 0768. 𝗕𝗥𝗔𝗜𝗡𝗦. Hello, hello. Thank you for being here. And Debbie. Thank you, Debbie, for being a member for 4 months. And you are always present and you are always supporting. So I really, really, really appreciate you. And hello, Ramon. Hello, Darwin. Wow, very strange, this lawsuit. Yeah. And 𝗕𝗥𝗔𝗜𝗡𝗦, drop the link down below. The second channel is Brains and Bad Decisions. You can always just look it up as well. And let me see. Let me pull it up. The document. Sorry, I have it ready, but I need to do something really quick. Okay, let's get started. So this document is, like I said, Steve Goncalves for 𝗕𝗥𝗔𝗜𝗡𝗦, basically all the victims' representatives, Washington State University, which is where Bryan Kohberger was attending. Let me, excuse me, I'm like choking. Hold on, let me get my coffee. I did try the Dubai mocha from Starbucks, and it is decent, I will say. We make mad discussions. Yeah. Okay, so let me see. Yeah, don't come exactly, 𝗕𝗥𝗔𝗜𝗡𝗦. Okay. So Brian Koberger is the one who attended Washington State University. So let's see, it says complaint for damages. Plaintiff brings cause of action against defendant Washington State University and allege the following. This case arises out of the violent assault and murder of 4 University of Idaho students by a Washington State University employee with a known history of threatening, stalking, and predatory behavior. WSU, Washington State University, as I will be referring to, brought Brian Koberger to Pullman, Washington in the Pacific Northwest to serve as a teaching assistant in the Criminal Justice and Criminology Department, while he also worked to obtain a PhD with a study focused on sexually motivated burglars and serial unalivers. So that is pretty crazy. Koberger was heavily reliant on WSU, who paid him a salary, provided free on-campus housing, medical benefits, and free tuition, all conditioned on his behavior and subject to being revoked. Pullman, Washington is only a few miles from Moscow, Idaho, home to the University of Idaho, and the combined area is referred to as Pullman-Moscow Community. Almost immediately upon his arrival to the Pullman-Moscow community, Koberger developed a reputation for discriminatory, harassing, and stalking behavior, instilling substantial fear among young females, students, and fellow WSU employees, necessitating regular security escorts for multiple females. I do want to give a disclaimer as well, like, this is just a complaint. There's a lot here, and I don't blame them for filing this lawsuit. Because if there were signs that Brian Koberger and actions that he was being a creep, it's very concerning. Despite receiving at least 13 formal reports of Koberger's inappropriate, predatory, and menacing behavior, WSU failed to respond in any meaningful way and allowed Koberger's escalating behavior to continue unchecked. On November 13th, 2022, a foreseeable and in fact predictable tragedy occurred when Koberger entered the bedroom of 4 undergraduate students and violently stabbed them to death. Yeah, and she highlights a foreseeable and in fact predictable right here, which is telling. These deaths should not and would not have occurred if WSU had acted appropriately. After Koberger pled guilty in July of 2025 to 4 counts of first-degree unaliving and burglary, various law enforcement agencies began releasing files from their investigations. Those files, together with other information in the public domain, paint a deeply disturbing picture of the breathtaking level of organizational paralysis and inaction by WSU that enabled Koberger over a period of months to stalk his victims and plan and commit these heinous murders. Before WSU brought Koberger to the Pullman-Moscow community, he had a history of H addiction, had been arrested for theft, and had made numerous posts over a period of years on public online forums, commenting about his inability to feel emotion and crazy thoughts. He had been removed from a vocational program in high school because of problems with women, and later local business owners had become so alarmed at his behavior towards young women that staff kept electronic notes about him to warn female staff when he arrived. He also pursued a graduate degree in criminology where he demonstrated a particular fascination with serial killers. He was a weirdo, period. I might not have known a lot of this. Almost immediately upon Koberger's arrival to the Pullman-Moscow community, he began demonstrating antisocial, disturbing, and menacing behaviors. In August of 2022, early in the semester, a fellow graduate student began leaving her office door open because she believed, quote unquote, this guy was going to do something inappropriate with a student. and said that Koberger struck her as a stalker or a sexual assaulter type. Based on how Koberger talked and treated women, another fellow graduate student described him as a possible future rapist. And Koberger's supervising instructor was aware that several female graduate students had reported that they were very uncomfortable with interactions they had with him. Female graduate students also complained that he made them feel unsafe. He was noted to be obsessed with studying sexually motivated burglars and serial killers. They even knew. I know, Evie. I know. This is crazy. How scary. On multiple occasions with multiple WSU female staff members and fellow students, Koberger would regularly stand close to their desks, loom over them, and would block their exits from an on-campus offices for long periods of time. One female graduate student reported that Koberger would trap her in her office and try to talk to her about the Ted Bundy crimes. I didn't know that. Did you guys let me know too if you know and comment about what you guys think because this is outrageous. Hey Michelle and hey abuelitas. Koberger followed several female students and staff to their cars after hours. Multiple female students and staff members were so uncomfortable with Koberger's behavior that security escorts were arranged for them after 5 p.m. Escorts that in some instances were provided by professors and in other instances by the campus police department. Certain if these staff members told others that Koberger had been stalking them. I didn't know how bad it was. Some graduate students reported that they kept their on-campus doors shut in effort to keep Koberger out, while others left their doors open as a place of refuge for others if they felt threatened by Koberger. In one instance, early in the semester, Koberger was so verbally attacked a female student in the classroom that she fled in tears, leaving all her belongings behind. Koberger was described as very angry, as if he had built up fury or rage. One sophomore student reported that Koberger had followed her and told her bosses at WSU about the incident. In response, they told her she would not be alone with Koberger, suggested that the campus security should escort her out, and commented that she was not the first to report such problems with him. On other occasions, this sophomore supervisor would take her home so that she did not have to walk by herself or take public transportation, and she became concerned about all of the precautions that needed to be taken because of Koberger's behavior. Okay, there's supervisors driving students home that, like, no wonder they're filing this lawsuit against the university. I had no idea. I'm screaming. I'm screaming because, like it states in this document, if they would have done something about it, could have prevented the unalivings of the Idaho 4. Hi, Lily. Good to see you. Thank you for being here. Oh my goodness. On more than one occasion, WSU employees would stay in a room where Koberger was engaging with one of their colleagues out of concern that the colleague should not be left alone with him. On another occasion, a WSU employee told her colleague to email her with the subject heading 911 if she needed help because of Koberger. On yet another occasion, a WSU undergraduate fled into a bathroom to hide from Koberger because she was so uncomfortable with his quote unquote scary behaviors. This is really, really intense. I only knew of the lady saying the potential graper. Wow, there's a lot of instances here that the university failed to recognize. And speaking from someone who has attended, like a university campus, like you can empathize with this because it's a very personal space. When you start, and depending on the field, you do have to interact a lot with teachers and professors and um, whoever's working for that department. If you need tutoring, how many red flags does one need to be a red flag? $1 million question. As early as mid-September of 2022, WSU professors were discussing the quote unquote need to do an intervention with Kovberger because of his treatment of female students. By September or October of 2022, a WSU professor believed Kovberger was stalking people. One student learned that Kovberger had photos of her and other female classmates on his cell phone. This part right here, you know how they say, oh, he wasn't stalking the Idaho 4? I refuse to believe that. I refuse to believe that. Maybe he had fake accounts. Maybe he had a burner phone. Maybe he was stalking them physically, something, because this behavior is, how did he pick them out, Kovberger's victims were encouraged to report his behaviors. Kovberger's victims were encouraged to report his behaviors, and a number of them didn't. I have to sneeze, excuse me. Okay. I sneezed like 3 times. Kovberger's victims were encouraged to report his behaviors, and a number of them did. The WSU Office of Compliance and Civil Rights had at least 13 formal complaints. 13 related to Kovberger, yet the individual in charge of acting on those complaints later reported that she had neither met nor ever spoken with Kovberger. Thank you, Evie. Hey, Rudy. 13 complaints, guys. One student complained, and then she noted on here, this would be BK Norton. I don't know what that means. One student complained that she was unsatisfied with how prior reports about Kovberger had been handled. Oh, it's her initials, I think. She did not believe that WSU would adequately protect her from retaliation, but she continued to report her experiences to the program chair and other faculty, stating that Kovberger's actions made her feel unsafe. Another graduate student made complaints about Kovberger and was directed to copy them to another department at WSU, but she was reluctant to do so because she had bad experiences with it in the past. They were even afraid of reporting it. Y'all, this is really infuriating for me. I'm not sure why. Maybe because I've had instances with creeps on universities, but on university campuses, but this is really upsetting. That's why when they said no one needs to be concerned after it happened when he wasn't found. Yeah, that's a good one. You're right, Cree. Yeah, when they're like, he's not a danger to society. One female graduate student reported that she wondered why people in power in the WSU Criminal Justice Department did not meaningfully address Kovberger's behavior. During one of several faculty meetings where Kovberger was discussed extensively, one faculty member remarked, "Mark my words, I work with predators. If we give him a PhD, that's the guy in that many years when he is a professor, we will hear he is harassing, stalking, and SAing his students." This same WSU professor believed that Kovberger was already stalking people. I can't imagine consistently, we talk about the Goncalveses and everybody, the the families of the victims. I can't imagine how upsetting and how they'll truly never get over this, you know? They were failed by the university for sure. Koberger's supervising instructor, however, was concerned that removing him from unemployment at WSU would open the university up to a civil lawsuit from Koberger, thereby elevating the financial interest of the university above the safety and security of students, staff and members of the Pullman-Moscow community. Meaning he knew firing him would be unsubstantiated and considered wrongful termination. Yeah. Wow. That's wild. The WSU Police Department is intended to be a critically important bulwark when it comes to protecting students and the community from sexual harassment, stalking, and dangerous predators. However, prior to Koberger being hired by WSU and arriving in the Pullman-Moscow community, the WSU Police Department had a long, troubling, and sordid history of tolerating and, in fact, fostering inappropriate sexual behavior in its own ranks and discouraging complete and accurate reporting of such misconduct. In 2007, the WSU chief of police was demoted after an internal investigation found he had viewed inappropriate emails on his university computer, forwarded those to other WSU police, and invited them to view them. What? Chief of police in 2007. There's a history of this behavior on behalf of the university. In 2011, WSU was fined over $80,000 by federal officials because of multiple sexual assaults that were not properly reported. WSU did not dispute the findings of the federal investigation. Wow, they had been sued before for this. In 2002, WSU undertook an investigation of improper sexual activities by the WSU police force involving allegations that an officer had sex with the victim in the presidential suite of the Martin Stadium and the WSU Observatory while on duty, and that WSU Police Department leadership did not properly report the incidents. Okay, come again? So in 2007, there's an incident. In 2011, there's an incident. And in 2022, the WSU police was having sex with the victim with a victim in the presidential suite. The investigation ultimately found that police department of leadership exhibited gross misconduct and incompetence and neglect of duty in response to claims of sexual misconduct. In August of 2022, so 3 months before the Idaho force, that crime happened on November 13th. In August of 2022, the WSU police chief assistant, chief, and captain all resigned prior to facing discipline for their actions. In response, WSU President Kirk Schulz issued a public statement indicating that WSU will not tolerate this kind of behavior nor the negligence of departmental command staff. A subsequent investigation into the offending officer during the fall semester of 2022 found that he engaged in predatory grooming behavior while in a supervisory role and had a history of eshel misconduct, and that the WSU Police Command fostered an environment that discouraged reporting eshel misconduct. The fall semester of 2022 engaged in predatory grooming behavior, which is what they were accusing Brian Kohberger of. So she put on here, who is this? The person who reviewed this, which is, her name is Jules, by the way. This is why Don Daniels is chief now. Oh, okay. So they resigned. Yeah, who is that offending officer? It was against the above described backdrop of WSU administrative inaction and police department dysfunction that Kohberger arrived in the Pullman, Moscow community, immediately began engaging in overt harassing, stalking, and predatory behaviors, including repeatedly stalking over a period of months the 4 victims that he ultimately murdered on November 13th of 2022, which Bill Thompson himself claims as false, that there was no stalking behavior. Not surprised. Am I the only one freaking out? I'm freaking out. I'm into this case and have followed it, so I'm like, and I stand by the victims' families. The key Q question: if WSU had fired Brian Kohberger, would that have stopped the Idaho shillings? Everything else is irrelevant. I agree. Double yikes is right. Hey, Mary Beth, good to see you, love. Subsequent forensic examination of Kohberger's electronic devices revealed that he had performed many searches regarding home invasions, co-ed unalivings, and serial unalivers. Kohberger's search history also had relevant internet searches about psychopaths, paranoia, and corn, involving exclusively non-consensual sex acts. Kohberger's search history also included research on a serial unaliver named Danny Rolling, who unalived 5 college students in Gainesville, Florida, by entering a college apartment through a sliding glass door, masked and dressed in black, and stabbed his victims to death using a K-bar knife, all features of Kohberger's latest crimes. I didn't know about that case. Did you guys know about that case? I'm writing this down because I want to look into it later. Okay, this case is literally what he did. Murdered 5 college students. The only difference here is 4 in Florida, entered the college apartment through a sliding glass door, which I believe Brian Kohberger did, right? We've established that, or did he go through the front door? That's his MO. Dressed in black. Remember Bethany and Dylan's, it was Bethany, right? That saw someone dressed in black, and used a K-bar knife as well. I'm shooketh. He imitates because he has no identity. A true trait of a psychopath? Question mark? Yeah. Subsequent law enforcement investigation also revealed that Kohberger had driven around the home of the murder victims in the middle of the night over a dozen times, and as early as 2022. And yeah, this is another lie per Bill Thompson himself at the plea change. How can they say that he wasn't stalking them? There's like proof of it. Over a dozen times. Despite having a formal threat assessment team, a now common practice at universities to proactively identify, assess, and manage individuals who may pose a risk of violence, WSU wholly failed to follow the process with Koberger and instead allowed his dangerous behaviors to escalate while it simultaneously continued to support him financially, provided him with access to university resources and students, and kept him housed rent-free in the Pullman Moscow community. As a result of WSU's actions and failures, 4 young college students were brutally unalived. They don't have a case. BK would have stayed in the area the defense will claim. All these claims happen at a different university. I don't know, man. Hey, Cactus, good to see you. Okay, parties involved. Steve Goncalves, Kaylee Goncalves' father, brings a survival claim and wrongful death claim. Okay. Karen Laramie, Maddie Mogan, same. Jeffrey Kernodle, Xana's dad. Stacy, which is Ethan's mom. WSU is a subdivision of the state of Washington and operates a public university with campuses across the state of Washington. All acts and omissions of defendant alleged in this complaint are alleged to have been committed by agents and or employees of the defendant acting within the course and scope of their agency and or employment, including members of the WSU Department of Criminal Justice and Criminology, members of the WSU Police Department, and members of the WSU administration. State of Washington, Skagit County. WSU had sufficient contacts with this judicial district to subject it to the personal jurisdiction of this court. Factual allegations common to all counts. Stalking is a serious and prevalent risk to college students. It is a serious and prevalent threat facing college-aged young adults both on and off campus. Up to 40% of college students, particularly females, report being stalked since entering college. The highest rate of stalking are experienced by students 18 to 24 years of age. Most stalkers are also students. Stalkers on college campuses are more likely to be acquaintances of the victim, such as a classmate, friend, or someone else that they recognize. Those diagnosed with the autism spectrum disorders are also more likely to engage in stalking behavior. Interesting that they, make that statement in this lawsuit because Bryan Kohberger has, allegedly has autism. Recently, oh yeah, you're welcome, Tell the Truth. You got a gifted membership. In addition to being a crime, stalking is commonly a violation of university policies and violation. It is critical for universities to promptly identify, basically, it's just claiming what stalking is. Coercive control tactics to exert power over victims. Fear is a central element of this crime, and victims might not often report that they are being stalked, but rather that the perpetrator will not leave them alone or is acting creepy. Is often associated with physical and sexual violence. Because it involves a pattern of behavior that often includes multiple and varied tactics, it is critical that the university promptly coordinate their response so that complaints about concerning behavior can properly and urgently be identified as stalking. WSU in particular has implemented policies and procedures designed to prohibit, prevent, and intervene in the situations involving discriminatory, harassing, stalking, or predatory behaviors, and to discipline its employees and students who engage. WSU has policies and procedures to control conduct and prohibit and prevent discrimination, harassment, and stalking, which, a lot of people felt that they couldn't go report it. As discussed further, WSU recruited Kohberger from the East Coast to the WSU Graduate School and hired him to be an employee of the university. WSU was obligated to control Kohberger under the requirements of its employment agreement with him. WSU gave Kohberger a written offer of employment to serve in the role of a teaching assistant, which offer Kohberger signed in agreement. Under the requirements of the employment agreement, WSU was obligated to control Kohberger. WSU policy provides that a teaching assistantship is an appointment in which a graduate student's primary duty is teaching or serving as a teaching assistant. Kovberger's employment with WSU came with conditions and obligations. Under WSU policies, one condition of employment was that Kovberger complete a sexual misconduct declaration prior to hire. He had to declare whether he was a subject of any findings or investigation into sexual misconduct. A failure to provide complete and accurate information in this declaration can result in WSU withdrawing the offer of employment. Presumably, this misconduct declaration is intended to identify and prevent potential inappropriate interactions with the undergraduate students that Kovberger would be interacting with in his employment with the university. Had WSU performed a comprehensive pre-employment background check on Kovberger, it likely would have revealed significant red flags and the risk of hiring Kovberger and bringing him to the Pullman-Moscow community. WSU was obligated to control Kovberger under the requirements of its graduate school policies and procedure manuals. Please note, get police report for phone incident needs BK's correct age, but if no charges at the end of it, then there wouldn't be a background to find. Mental health and rehab stays are not all jail stays, so they don't show up either. Interesting. As a teaching assistant and employee of WSU, Kovberger was required to abide by these policies. Policies and procedure manuals, they included that. WSU policies required that Kovberger be at work each normal workday, including periods when the university classes are not in session. It also states that a key contributor to the community, graduate assistants have a responsibility to maintain high standards of professional and ethical conduct. WSU was obligated to control Kovberger under the requirements of its Department of Criminal Justice handbook. Okay. Similarly, the WSU Department of Criminal Justice and Criminology Graduate Handbook, which Kovberger was also required to comply with, highlights the significance of his employee with the state of Washington and the importance of behaving appropriately. It should be remembered that TA appointments qualify the student to be an employee of both the university and the state. Students are expected to uphold the standards of professional conduct that are implied by this status. In particular, students should be familiar with policies regarding inappropriate workplace conduct, amorous relationships, and respect for undergrad students. Moreover, as a teaching assistant employed by WSU, the university had increased supervision and oversight responsibilities with respect to its conduct. WSU was obligated to control under its standard conduct for the students. So these are where they, in the policy, where they failed. WSU Center for Community Standards is charged with enforcing the standards of conduct. A WSU representative previously testified in another lawsuit against WSU. Okay, so they've had definitely more than one lawsuit. If you guys missed it, there was an incident in 2007, 2011, and 2022, 3 months before the Idaho 4 crime. Hey, Vanjie, good to see you. Hey, KMB, good to see you all. Okay, let's continue. So it says, testified in a lawsuit against WSU that the Center for Community Standards can respond to reported violations that occur off campus if they create safety concerns or if they impact the reputation of the university negatively. In fact, most WSU Center for Community Standards investigations concern behavior that occurs at private residences off campus or in close proximity. Under his terms of enrollment, Kovberger acknowledged the university's authority to take disciplinary action for conduct on or off university property that is detrimental to the university's mission. The WSU standards of conduct prohibit physical harm or threats of physical harm. Okay, we get that. They define harassment as severe, persistent, pervasive, and is such of a nature that it would cause a reasonable person in the complaints complainant position substantial emotional distress and undermine their ability to work, study, or participate. WSU was obligated to control Koberger under Executive Policy 15, which says WSU also has a policy prohibiting discrimination and harassment that obligated it to control Koberger and which it recognizes can impact the community. So here's a copy of that executive policy. Like Title IX EP 15, it prohibits stalking. Good thing there wasn't any then. WSU was obligated to control Koberger under Executive Policy 42, threat assessment, which identifies, assesses, and addresses threats to the university community. Threat assessment team. Wow, so they have a threat assessment team, they have counselors, and they have a police department, campus police department, and they all failed to freaking do anything about it. The purpose of WSU's threat assessment team is to work with any appropriate university departments, law enforcement, mental health agencies, and other third parties to assess situations and recommend appropriate interventions. Threat assessment areas of focus include, but are not limited to, behavior that creates reasonable fear of physical harm, intimidation, threats, stalking, fixation, or harassment. WSU was obligated to control Kobergers under its WAVR 21 threat assessment. WAVR warns that a specific indicator of dangerous level of anger is when an individual engages in physically threatening or intimidating movement or gestures, such as standing too close to someone and glaring at them. Stalking or menacing behaviors is a strong indicator of future violence. According to Waiver 21, workplace or campus-related stalking, typically behavior involves physical following, surveillance, and appearances at the victim's work or home. Many stalkers have a criminal history and history of drug abuse and psychiatric issues. Stalkers also tend to be highly intelligent. I love how they include that in here because it's Bryan Koberger. It defines stalking as a broader than physical violence per se. Warns that a thorough investigation and consistent management and follow-through are essential for dealing with workplace and campus stalkers. According to Waiver 21, a critical predictor for violence is when the perpetrator engages in pre-attack planning and preparation, such as actively researching a potential target's routine and schedules. They had so much in place that could have essentially stopped Bryan Koberger. Was also obligated to control Koberger under WSU's family and graduate apartment agreement because they provided housing to him. Has to abide by all local, state, and federal laws and WSU rules and regulations. One of the amenities that WSU provided to Koberger as part of the apartment agreement was free internet access, both wired and wireless. Network services agreement for connection of personally owned devices to WSU owned operated networks. So here's the agreement. The apartment agreement also prohibited Koberger from possessing any weapons, including knives, in his apartment. I can't believe he didn't get kicked out either. I mean, with the first or second complaint about, leaning, if you guys missed the beginning of the live, it was like somebody complained about him being too close and being like, too touchy and looming over them. I would be pissed. So no weapons, which we know he probably didn't abide by those. When Koberger arrived at WSU in the fall of 2022, the WSU Police Department was consumed by a university investigation in its own long and sordid history of tolerating and, in fact, fostering serial sexual misconduct in its own ranks. Operates its own police force, which is intended to be a critically important bulwark when it comes to protecting students in the community. However, prior to Koberger being hired by WSU and arriving in Pullman Moscow community, the WSU Police Department had a long and troubling history of tolerating and, in fact, fostering inappropriate 𝗍𝗏 behavior. We read at the beginning, they had been sued for $80,000 as well. The scandal and investigation that consumed the WS Police Department in the fall of 2022 was not the first such scandal. In 2007, remember 2007, 2011, and 2022, there was major concern going on. Department in the fall of 2022 was not the first scandal. In 2007, WSU Police Chief Steve Hansen was demoted from his position after a WSU internal auditor's investigation concluded that Hansen had viewed emails containing inappropriate content on his university computer, forwarded those emails to other WSU police, and invited other members of the WSU police to view them. Like corn? I wonder if it was corn or stuff relating to students. Like, I wonder if which I'm sure it'll maybe say, why didn't they let him go? I'm blown away too. Hansen steps down as WSU police chief. He was in the position since 2000 and became a lieutenant on the force. Hansen viewed emails that were sent to him containing inappropriate material, forwarded such emails to Assistant Chief Scott West, and invited other members of the department to view them. That, quote unquote, that was a mistake on my part, and I want to apologize for the embarrassment it has caused the department and the university. Because of this situation, I accept the administration's decision to demote me to lieutenant. In 2011, federal education officials fined WSU $82,500 over a separate campus safety incident that occurred in 2007 involving multiple 𝗍𝗏 assaults. It has to be because of the corn. They'll probably have lawsuits, yeah. Federal officials fined WSU over campus safety. So, they're basically just including that they have had multiple incidents regarding this and lawsuits. Federal officials charged WSU with failing to properly disclose forcible sex crime statistics and to properly classify offenses in its annual security report. So they weren't documenting complaints and stuff like that. Not a good look for this university. The charges arose out of two incidents in 2007. In one incident that occurred in August of 2007, WSU police labeled the offense as a domestic dispute, even though investigators found it included a grape perpetrated by the friend of the victim's husband. Wait, what? Found that included a grape perpetrated by a friend of the victim's husband. In the second incident, a January 2007 police report of an 𝗍𝗏 assault was relabeled as unfounded by WSU police records manager without authority to make changes. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I agree, Ruth. Good to see you. Yeah, this lawsuit is deserved, and I hope they win. Oh my gosh, I hope they win too. And clearly, and I'm sorry to say this, and this is just my opinion, but this university is not somewhere you wanna attend or send your children to. Well, I say children like college students or kids, but you know what I mean, right? Mm-mm. No, no, honey. No, no. By the way, Mary Beth, I wanted to say that I got the Dubai mocha today from Starbucks. I know you brought it up last time. Um, I'm disappointed, man. WSU did not dispute the findings of the federal investigation. In early August of course they didn't dispute it because they knew they were in the wrong. In early August 22, the police chief, assistant chief, and captain of the WSU Police Department resigned from their positions to avoid investigation into yet another incident of serious sexual misconduct involving a WSU police officer. The spokesman review. WS police leaders retire early to avoid discipline following sexual misconduct allegations. WSU initiated a disciplinary investigation into the WSU Police Department for failing to advise university leadership of a 2020 departmental investigation, including a police officer alleged to have engaged in sexual activities on campus and while on duty. Wow. The investigation revealed that in December of 2020, a WSU police officer notified the police department command staff that they learned of a possible non-consensual sexual activity between another WSU police officer and a victim on campus. A non-consensual, a grape. The allegations of improper activities included that the WSU police officer had sex with the victim in the presidential suite at the Martin Stadium and at the WSU Observatory while he was on duty as a police officer. How scary. They are disgusting, right, Ruth? Psh, good old boys club, huh? The offending officer told departmental staff that he was willing to identify the name of the women involved, but the WS Police Department investigators said that was not necessary, and then misleadingly wrote in their internal report that they could not substantiate the allegations without talking to the victim, whose identity they did not have. That's wild. Despite being advised of these incidents, the WSU police command staff failed to advise the CCR as required by the policies. Despite that, the WSU Police Department offender did face internal disciplinary action for misconduct while on duty. Internal disciplinary action? Like, you mean he got fired because he should have? I don't. That's crazy. In March of 2022, the WSU administrators learned that the 2020 incident and the WSU Police Department's investigation that was previously unreported to administration. Disgusting. Investigations were initiated by the WSU CCR and HRS, and the WSU Police Department command staff were advised that disciplinary proceedings had been initiated against them based on the investigation's finding that they exhibited gross misconduct, incompetence, and neglect of duty in their response to claims of sexual misconduct involving the WSU officer. All of the WSU Police Department command staff then announced their resignations and retirement before the disciplinary process concluded. They quit. They quit before they could get in trouble. What cowards. In response to resignations, WSU President Kirk Schultz stated, "These are positions of great public trust, and the WSU will not tolerate this kind of behavior, nor the negligence of departmental command staff." So what have we been reading for the last 45 pages? Shake my head. WSU then hired the retired chief of police of the city of Pullman's police department to serve as interim chief of police as the WSU police department. This would be Jenkins. Is this why Fry told him for the first time ever no when he asked if MPD needed help? Note that. The offending WSU police officer, however, did not resign, and WSU continued to conduct a formal investigation under Title IX. WSU CCR then proceeded to spend months during the 2022 fall semester investigating the allegations of a serial echelon misconduct of its WSU police officer. So the fall when the Idaho 4 crime happened, they were doing an investigation on these police officers. And it doesn't necessarily relate right to the Idaho 4, the police officers, but it shows, their lack of protecting the students. And if you're hiring people and allowing, quote unquote, allowing these behaviors from your police staff, it's no wonder you hired Brian Koberger, who fits perfectly right in with all the creeps. The offending WSU police officer admitted to having sex while on duty. Note, unknown male DNA, cops in the area that night. This has been a theory of many for a long time. They're saying, so could it have been a Washington State University police officer who committed the crime? There was unknown male DNA at the Idaho 4. Cops in the area that night, per usual. They're roaming. It's a campus. It's considered campus housing. It has been a theory for a long time. Hey, old days. I just caught up with the last Epstein Live. It was so good. Well, we have another one scheduled tonight. You missed a little bit, but you can replay. The WSU investigation found that the offending officer engaged in predatory grooming behavior while in his supervisory role at the university, made sexually explicit comments to coworkers, subjected coworkers to non-consensual physical contact, and engaged in sexual activities while on duty in university property. Wow. It gives me I'm getting Karen Reed Proctor vibes here. You know what I mean? Just those text messages and this police officer on campus has just been harassing the coworkers, the students. How scary. WSU records also reveal that the WSU police had a history of sexual misconduct while on duty directed toward fellow employees, including student interns. The offending WSU police officer had a reputation of engaging in these sexual activities around the Pullman campus, including in the presidential suite and the WSU observatory, where he allegedly raped someone. Fellow WSU police officers also told investigators that they had concerns about the offending officer making comments about student interns, such as, quote unquote, "Can you have them do that? A calisthenics movement again?" And, quote unquote, "Got any hot interns this year?" Wow. Did he ever say why he didn't know? That sounded like they encouraged his behavior, definitely. The offending oh my gosh, I have story time for you guys later. It's involving a teacher in my high school too. I'll save that for the second channel. The offending WSU officer also sent inappropriate pictures to a former employee and used a ringtone on his cell phone associated with the 𝗫𝗏 website. Excuse me? Also sent inappropriate pictures to a former employee and used a ringtone on his cell phone associated with a 𝗫𝗏 website. Like, what was the ringtone? People moaning and having sex? What do you mean a ringtone associated with the pornography website? Disturbing, to say the least here. Nasty. I don't know what that means, but the offending WSU officer also groped a newly hired female employee of the WSU Police Department who complained to a fellow officer. Despite reporting that incident, it was not documented. In early November of 2022, the offending WSU police officer resigned. November, you guys, of 2022. That's when the crime of the Idaho happened. Because, there's conspiracy theories and opinions and thoughts and feelings and emotions about how it could have been someone involved in law enforcement. Because how could someone get away with the crime so perfectly, right? Or almost, at least. All this heat on WSU, and then the university students of Ohio get murdered. WSU police sergeant accused of sexual misconduct resigns. Here's the ad in the college campus magazine. Ultimately, the investigation determined that the WS Police Department command fostered an environment that discouraged reporting this misconduct. These serious misconduct allegations and the ensuing months-long investigation during the 2022 fall semester substantially preoccupied WSU administrators, and in particular, the WSU CCR office. I would assume they would have taken this more seriously at the time, if true. WSU brings Koberger to the Pullman-Moscow community and quickly learns of his threatening, stalking, and predatory behaviors. As discussed in detail below, around the same time, WSU CCR office had received numerous formal complaints about Brian Koberger's discriminatory, harassing, stalking, and predatory behavior, but had not acted on those complaints or even met with or spoken to Koberger about them. He was born in 1994 and grew up in rural eastern Pennsylvania. Koberger was overweight, bullied, and had difficult developing relationships with female students. I wonder if Brian Koberger was ever raped as a child or something. I don't know. Just an idea. Definitely sounds like something Proctor would say, right? It was later reported that Koberger, and I don't mean to say, I don't mean to say that everyone who has been through something traumatic like that is going to be a schmurder. I'm just saying, could that have been a reason maybe that Brian Koberger hated women? It later reported that Koberger has autism spectrum disorder. Later in school, Koberger lost significant weight and became more aggressive with classmates. Note, Casey's little brother mentioned this. Over a number of years before he came to Pullman-Moscow community, Koberger had made previous public posts on an online forum called the Visual Snow or Static Forum. People with quote unquote visual snow report seeing small moving dots across their field of vision. Koberger posted about his crazy thoughts, depersonalization, and inability to feel emotion, and that he was a blank soul in his despair. Okay, I had heard about the 4chan stuff. Is that what it's called? But I had not heard about this, the Visual Snow or Static Forum. Have you guys? I'm about to Google that ish. Interesting. I had not heard of that. I'm curious what it says when I pull it up. Yeah, allegedly he was on there. It looks like he had maybe trying to scam people into buying something, but everything else is about his symptoms. There's also a video where Brian's family says he has bipolar disorder, and that has now been deleted from the internet. He could still have narcissism or antisocial traits. Huh. It seems like he's been trying to figure out what's wrong with him for a long time, and he finally snapped. We shall go through those later. Let's continue. So he said he had crazy thoughts, inability to feel emotion, psychopath, and that he was a blank soul. That's what Brian Koberger said about himself. Koberger posted online, quote unquote, "As I hug my family, I look into their faces. I see nothing. It is like I am looking at a video game, but less." That's very scary. Koberger wrote that he could do, quote unquote, "whatever I want with little remorse." If it's being brought up in this lawsuit, it means, that there's proof of this stuff. Koberger also wrote about an array of mental health challenges that he faced, including anxiety, depression, depersonalization, lack of emotion, and his quote unquote constant thought of unaliving oneself. I was watching this video today, and maybe I'll include that for a later watch on the second channel, but it was like discussing how suicidal people, generally sometimes end up unaliving other people before they unalive themselves because they have to be comfortable with the notion of taking someone's life. So I find that interesting, not that I'm saying everyone who has been suicidal is going to be a schmurder, but if he had already thought he was useless to the earth here on earth, that it is contributed to how he so brutally killed the Idaho 4. Koberger also developed a H addiction while in high school that he funded in part by theft. Koberger attended a law enforcement vocational program in high school, but was kicked out of the program his junior year due to a series of complaints from female classmates. According to the administrator of the program, to be removed from a program, it has to be pretty severe. Brian was then transferred to the HVAC vocational program because it did not have any female participants. So even back then in high school, he was already having issues with female participants and harassing people and females. Koberger did not attend the vocational program his senior year and finished his high school degree online. Yeah, I'm sure he is uncomfortable. In 2014, Koberger was arrested in Pennsylvania for theft. He went on to attend 𝗕𝗏𝗄's University in Pennsylvania, seeking a graduate degree in criminology. At 𝗕𝗏𝗄's, Koberger demonstrated a particular fascination with serial unalivers. Also, while at 𝗕𝗏𝗄's, Koberger reportedly made multiple women uncomfortable. It says note. I only remember hearing from dudes. So he was making dudes and females uncomfortable. Employees at local businesses in Koberger's community was so concerned about his behavior that they took extraordinary measures. For example, a female staff at a local brewery complained about Koberger's behavior and even made a note in the electronic ID system that would warn staff about his conduct when his ID was scanned. The female staff noted that Koberger would make creepy comments and ask probing questions like where they lived, and he would get upset if they did not answer. That says it has never been proven, though. After obtaining his master's degree from 𝗕𝗥𝗔𝗓, Koberger applied to the PhD program at WSU on recommendation of a previous professor. Was selected for the criminal justice program by the WSU panel. WSU also hired Koberger to be a teaching assistant as part of his employment. WSU provided him with reduced free tuition by giving him a non-resident tuition waiver, campus office, on-campus housing, health, and insurance benefits, and paid him a biweekly salary. Koberger would later tell law enforcement that he did not know much about Washington or Idaho, and that prior to moving to Washington, he had not left the tri-state area, much in the Atlantic Northeast. In fact, before WSU hired Koberger, he had never been to the Pacific Northwest. On July 9th, 2022, shortly after arriving at WSU, Koberger attended a pool party in nearby Moscow, Idaho. So July 9th, so a couple months before the crimes. So it says right here, note, Steve Goncalves already told Brat Norton that there was no pool party connection between Kaylee and Koberger. So why is this being mentioned? Oh, wow. If it wasn't true, why would it be being mentioned? So he had met Kaylee at this pool party, allegedly. Moscow, Idaho is the home of the University of Idaho and is less than 10 miles from WSU. There's a little map. As neighboring small college towns, there is unexpected and considerable interaction between the students enrolled at WSU and the University of Idaho. As evidence of that well-recognized fact, the probable cause affidavit that ultimately was used to obtain an arrest warrant for Koberger. As evidence of that well-recognized fact, the probable cause affidavit that ultimately was used to obtain arrest warrant for Koberger, signed under penalty of perjury by Corporal Brett Payne, states, both Pullman and Moscow are small college towns and people commonly travel back and forth between them. Yeah, it says, you mean the one that the state themselves called irrelevant? WSU and University of Idaho allow students at each school to take courses at the other school. Cross-listed courses and programs. In fact, the WSU Criminal Justice and Criminology Department regularly interacts with professors and students enrolled at the University of Idaho. The WSU Criminal Justice and Criminology program advertises its main web page, its relationship with the University of Idaho. What does that have to do with anything? That's right. A lot of, community colleges and stuff are related to bigger universities and whatnot. So I don't know that that's relevant, but I guess it proves, that there was interaction. According to the Moscow Police Department, the partnership with Whitcomb has provided the community of Moscow and the University of Idaho with advanced support in many technical fields. Whitcomb is the agency that consists of the County of Whitman, City of Pullman, and Washington State University. Okay, now here we go back to the July pool party. The July 2022 pool party attended by Koberger was located near the University of Idaho campus at an off-campus apartment complex called the Grove at Moscow. The Grove apartment complex is a mere 1 mile distance from the home of the 4 students that would later be murdered by Koberger. It says, note, not a single person from 1122 was there. Koberger had been invited to the Moscow, Idaho pool party by another WSU student, and many of the people attending the party were graduate students. Koberger made multiple females uncomfortable at the pool party in Moscow, Idaho. When Koberger arrived to the pool party, he approached a female student from the University of Idaho that was in the property's office and asked how to get to the pool. She was wearing a sundress with a swimsuit underneath. She reported that Koberger was blatantly staring at her body and acted weird. When she later went to the pool, Koberger made very direct eye contact with her and then made a beeline towards her. She was uncomfortable and weirded out by Koberger's behavior and his staring. The interaction was concerning enough that another attendee intervened to intercept Koberger. Another female attendee told Koberger that she was married in an attempt to end the conversation, but Koberger persisted in engaging with her. A male attendee finally had to physically intervene, but Koberger continued to be fixated on the girls. Another female also reported that Koberger behaved oddly at the pool party and gave an off vibe that caused her to keep her eye on him. On August 17th, 2022, the WSU graduate program hosted a meet and greet event at the WSU campus. Koberger attended, and fellow graduate students noted that they did not like their interactions with him. There's a note here that says, but then one handed him her phone so he could put his number in it, and then she called him. So he would have hers too. At the graduate school orientation in August of 2022, a fellow WSU graduate student instantly had a bad feeling about Koberger from the moment that he approached her. A fellow WSU graduate teaching assistant quickly identified Koberger as a threat. Quote unquote, pretty early on, I started leaving my office door open when he was in his office, especially if there was ever a student in there, because I just wanted to make sure that nothing was going inappropriate. Like, I felt way early on this guy was going to do something inappropriate with a student. The teaching assistant indicated that she pegged Koberger as stalker or sexual assaulter type. Most, if not all, of Koberger's fellow graduate students were also teaching assistants or research assistants employed by WSU, and as such were mandatory reporters of any instances of sexual discrimination, harassment, and stalking. Some instances of Koberger's discriminatory, harassing, and stalking behavior were reported, but then they went unreported in violation of WSU policies. Koberger's supervising instructor at WSU was aware early on the female graduate students did not like Koberger because he was off-putting, and that several female graduate students were very uncomfortable because of interactions they held with Koberger. Koberger was known by WSU professors and fellow students to have a particular interest in studying sexually motivated burglars and obsessed with serial unalivers. One fellow WSU graduate student reported that based on how Koberger talks to and treats females, people in the WSU criminal justice program thought that he was a possible future rapist. During the second or third week of the semester, a female WSU graduate student hosted the whole graduate cohort at her apartment to watch a ball game. Koberger attended the event. Afterward, Koberger began telling others about prescriptions that she took, leading the graduate student to suspect that he had looked through her medicine cabinet while attending the event at her apartment. That is creepy. He shouldn't have been a lot around the students. From very early on, he should have been fired. He had seen her on the grounds. I wonder how he gets along with his mom. It feels very Stephen Stearns and his mom type vibes. If you know, you know. And this is freaky. He went, he was invited to the event and looked through her medicine cabinet. What a weirdo. Female graduate students would complain that Koberger made them feel uncomfortable, feel unsafe, and that he was creepy and would try to distance themselves from him, including physically spacing out from Koberger in classrooms. There were numerous instances where Koberger would stare at students weirdly during class, making students uncomfortable. Koberger's supervising instructor at WSU believed that Koberger did this in a way to display power or dominance. Koberger's supervising instructor also was aware of a complaint made by a senior student that Koberger stared at her a lot in class and it made her feel uncomfortable. Koberger would engage in similar inappropriate behavior with WSU students or WSU instructors, sorry. The instructor under whom Koberger served as undergraduate teaching assistant reported that she had regularly interacted with him and he was frequently in her office. That instructor stated that Koberger would stand behind her while she was working at her desk and stare over her shoulder at her. The instructor had another WSU professor escort her to her car at the end of the workday because Koberger's behaviors was such a concern. Even the instructors were weirded out by him. Koberger's inappropriate behavior with this instructor also was reported to other professors. Another female WSU staff member described Koberger as creepy and stated that he would simply stand at her desk and stare at her or her coworker. She also observed Koberger physically block her coworker in a desk area. Koberger would also allow his female staffers and her coworkers to their would also follow, this female staffer and her coworker to their cars at the end of the day, causing her to arrange for escorts at 5 p.m. after work to safely get to their cars. That's like insane. People were being escorted because of him and they still did nothing. There were also numerous instances where Koberger would block the door and trap female graduate students in their on-campus student offices for long periods of time. In one instance, a WSU professor heard a female graduate student say, "I really need to get out of here." And the professor intervened by going to the office to allow the female student to leave. One female graduate student reported that Koberger would trap her in the office and he would try to talk to her about the Ted Bundy crimes. That's creepy. Some WSU graduate students would try to keep their on-campus office doors closed in order to keep Koberger out. Yet other WSU graduate students would keep their office doors open as a place of refuge for others in the event that Koberger was present. This is ridiculous. They were even like leaving their doors open. That's how creepy he was. Why was he there? Koberger was perceived, I mean, I guess it's not illegal to look creepy, but this is like too much. He shouldn't have been there for this long or for that long at the time. Koberger was perceived by female classmates as dominant and sexist and was disrespectful to female instructors. Koberger's coworkers in the WSU criminal justice program believed that he was an incel or involuntary celibate and was actually frustrated. By September of 2022, Koberger had developed a reputation at WSU for being a dick. Koberger also developed a reputation at WSU for being homophobic. Koberger would pick fights with other WSU classmates, and his arguments would leave the class upset. Koberger was also described as very angry, as if he had built up a fury, a rage. Koberger also tended to be aggressive when interacting with female colleagues and would get agitated, argumentative, and confrontational during class instruction, as well as out of the classroom, often prompting other classmates to intervene. In one instance that occurred during the first few weeks of the semester, a confrontation with Koberger made a female student so upset that she fled the classroom in tears during the middle of the class, leaving her possessions behind. Professors in the WSU graduate program were aware of the incident at the time it occurred. The student later filed a complaint against Koberger with the WSU CCR office. The student filed this complaint with the goal of creating documentation of the incident should further issues arise with Koberger. Koberger was supposedly spoken to about his inappropriate behavior, but nothing was done about the incident. Koberger's female classmate kept a board with a running tally of his behaviors in female instructor-led classes versus male instructor-led classes, as well as documenting his discriminatory behaviors and comments with colleagues and instances of aggressively staring at students. And then it says, note, Koberger's female classmates. He then asked her for coffee, trying to mend the issue, and she reported him to HR because she had a girlfriend. During one particular class, Koberger stared at a female student 9 times. WSU professors were aware of this tally board concerning Koberger's behavior. Where is this tally board? Yeah, that's a good question. And if it exists and it's true, that's insane. He should have been gone. Yeah. In one incident, Koberger and female WSU graduate student were alone in the classroom, and Koberger physically blocked her from leaving the room. In another incident, Koberger asked out a fellow WSU staff member who rejected his advance, and then he followed her outside to her car. He couldn't handle rejection. That WSU staff member told another female WSU graduate student that Koberger had been stalking her. Dude, even the staff. Yeah. It is unbelievable. This resulted in another report being filed. The WSU criminal justice program was also aware about how people were uncomfortable with Brian. Koberger's office mate, a fellow WSU teaching assistant for the criminology program, was aware that Brian attempted to use his authority as a TA to inappropriately interact with female students. The office mate thought that Koberger wanted a girlfriend and would frequently talk about his desire for a girlfriend. A 19-year-old WSU sophomore first met Koberger when he came to her student office. Shortly thereafter, Koberger started coming to her office nearly every day to talk. Koberger's office was located in a different part of the building, and he did not have a particular reason to be in the area of the sophomore's office. The topics of his conversations became more personal rather than focused on his studies or work as a WSU teaching assistant. The sophomore would try to focus on her work, but Koberger would remain in her office whether or not she interacted with him. She described her interactions with Koberger as uncomfortable. On one occasion, the sophomore returned to her office to find Koberger inside. She told him that she was closing the office and he followed her outside. Koberger then asked if she wanted to get coffee, but the sophomore declined and stated that her girlfriend was coming to pick her up. The sophomore told her bosses at WSU about the incident. In response, they told her she would not be alone with Koberger and suggested that she have campus security escort her out. Her bosses at WSU also told the sophomore that she was not the first to report such problems with Koberger. Koberger continued to come to the sophomore's campus office when she was alone. On another occasion, Koberger stood directly behind the sophomore's chair as she was working. He stood directly behind her for a while and did not move until another WSU advisor came into the room. The sophomore was told that the WSU staff had talked to Koberger as many as 5 times about his inappropriate behavior. When she would see Koberger in the hallway, he would physically corner her and attempt to force a conversation, even though the sophomore tried not to engage. The sophomore found these experiences to be scary, especially when she was alone. The sophomore thought it was strange that Koberger seemed to know her schedule and would intentionally encounter her. In another incident, the sophomore saw Koberger walking outside as she was locking up her campus office. Koberger made eye contact with the sophomore through the window as if he was looking for her in anticipation, and then he entered the office building. In order to avoid contact with Koberger, the panicked sophomore fled into the bathroom to hide. She hid out of instinct due to how uncomfortable contact with Koberger had become. People were hiding in the bathroom. Out of concerns over Koberger, the sophomore's boss at WSU would occasionally take her home so that she would not have to walk by herself or take public transportation. Dude, if your boss at the university is taking you home because of this, we're outraged. The sophomore became concerned about how many precautions needed to be taken because of Koberger's behavior. In another incident, the sophomore neighbor informed her that someone was lurking outside the window of her residence and warned her to lock the door. She learned later that Koberger lived nearby. He was peeping in her window. Koberger's supervising instructor at WSU was aware that the sophomore had made complaints about Koberger's behavior. Another female undergraduate student who attended a class where Koberger was the assigned teaching assistant reported that he always seemed to be staring at her when she would look up. She also noted that Koberger intentionally would leave the class at the same time as her and follow her to her class. Later, that student learned that Koberger had photos of her and her female classmates on his cell phone. Note, rumor from Dateline, was the photo itself actually shown to her to confirm, or she just saw it blurry on Dateline and thinks? Oh, okay. A WSU employee who was assigned to work with Koberger began receiving complaints in late August of 2022 from students and staff in the criminal justice program about Koberger's inappropriate behavior. Because of these complaints, the WSU employee spent a lot of time, at least once a week, speaking about Koberger during different disciplinary meetings. These meetings focused on Koberger's interactions with fellow graduate students in and out of the classroom, along with his behavior around some of the criminal justice professors. The various complaints included outspoken discriminatory comments, which were homophobic, ableist, xenophobic, and misogynistic in nature. Other complaints included that Koberger would stare at people and stand uncomfortably close or lean over women, making them feel uncomfortable. As a result of the complaints, the WSU employee brought Koberger to her office to talk about the complaints and attempt to get him to correct his behavior, but Koberger deflected personal responsibility. What does that mean? Ableist discrimination in favor or non-disabled people. Deflected personality. On more than one occasion, WSU employees would stay in a room where Koberger was engaging with a WSU colleague out of concern that the colleague should not be left alone. In one instance, the WSU employee told a colleague to email her with the subject heading 911 if she needed help. Another WSU professor was asked by WSU staff to check in on another colleague because Koberger had been harassing her. A fellow female WSU graduate student was asked by WSU to start keeping track of Koberger's behavior towards her. The student had already made an informal report about Koberger to WSU, but she did not like the way WSU responded because she felt that they would not adequately protect her from retaliation. So she makes an informal report, but says she didn't like the way they responded. The student continued to report her experiences with Koberger to WSU, including to the program chair and other professors, and reported that Koberger's actions made her feel unsafe. Another female WSU graduate student made multiple complaints about Koberger's behavior. She was directed to copy her complaints to another department, but she was reluctant to do so because she had bad experiences in the past. As early as mid-September of 2022, WSU professors were discussing the need to do an intervention with Koberger because he's offended several of our female students. When asked, how do you want to handle this? Another WSU professor responded, let's see when we have more info. On September or October of 2022, so like 2 months before the Idaho 4 murders, a fellow WSU graduate teaching assistant was asked to monitor Koberger's behavior because others at WSU wanted to track it. The teaching assistant was instructed to write down anything she saw and notify WSU staff. It was discussed that WSU could not give Koberger a PhD and the resulting authority that could give him out of concern over his inappropriate behavior. So they knew, they were so aware of it that they didn't give him a PhD. And the entity that could was concerned over his inappropriate behavior. Also around September or October of 2022, a female graduate student came to a WSU professor to report that someone had broken into her apartment and stolen intimate items such as perfume and underwear, and that the student was very scared. That WSU professor also believed that Koberger was stalking people. Wait, so is there a police report about this? Why did she think it was Brian Koberger? In another incident, Koberger got into an argument with his WSU mentor and supervising instructor, from whom he also served as a teaching assistant. This argument escalated to the point of shouting and the instructor telling Koberger to leave his office. Koberger refused to leave the instructor's office, causing the instructor to leave his own office. It was common for Koberger to prevent his mentor and instructor from leaving his office, which the mentor believed Koberger was power tripping to exert control. This was Snyder. He was mad he was going to be late. Koberger was also known to make unwanted advances to female employee at the WSU bookstore. A male bookstore coworker would attempt to intervene to prevent Koberger from interacting with the female employee. Dude, was he just like harassing everyone? Like on campus, the teachers, the mentors, the professors, literally everybody. Thank you, Irony, for the super sticker. I appreciate it. Hey, fam, good to see you. He was literally harassing like all the teachers, everybody. The female employee was unsettled that Koberger would get her name even though she did not wear a name tag and had not told him her name. It also seemed to the female employee that Koberger knew what hours she worked and he would make remarks about her schedule. One evening, the female employee was home alone and changing in her bedroom when someone knocked on her window. She called her husband to come home from work. On another occasion, she heard someone on her porch in the evening. Her husband came home again and saw a white car leaving the area. Koberger drove a white car. Both occurrences were in August or September of 2022. So they're just placing him there, although it could have been him, right? A WSU employee whose duties included investigating and providing education, mediation, and other disciplinary-focused responses to complaints or reports made by members of the student body, especially complaints that have a discriminatory nexus, stated that she never interacted with Koberger, but admitted that she had received 13 reports highlighting concerns regarding his behavior. One fellow WSU graduate student reported that the way Koberger spoke to females in the department was unsettling to them, and that she had never met anyone that acted in such a condescending manner as Koberger. She wondered why people in power in the WSU Criminal Justice Department did not address his behavior. On November 2nd, 2022, so days before the Idaho 4 murders, WSU put Koberger on a brief, vague, and nonspecific 4-point improvement plan due to his inappropriate behavior, but that plan set no specific goals. I wonder, like, if this was him getting to that point, you know? Like, he had been harassing people, stalking people, doing all of this, and then he starts getting in trouble for it, and then he kills all these people. Like, he just snapped, but it was, like, definitely premeditated, right? Improvement plan. Bryan Kohberger. Meet weekly with supervisor, keep track of weekly hours to report, establish weekly goals with supervisors, and discuss the goals. Make sure goals are progressively harder to ensure progress through the rest of the semester. How is that helping all of the things he was doing? Like, where is the stalking? Don't stalk people. You know what I mean? That's like a very dumb improvement plan. Lack thereof. On Tuesday, November 8th, so like 5 days before, WSU conducted a remedial mandatory discrimination and harassment training for all graduate students due to Kohberger's inappropriate behavior. During Kohberger's attendance at this training, WSU staff observed him sitting at the back of the room with his hands behind his head, staring at the ceiling. The graduate students knew that the discrimination and harassment training was specifically due to his behavior, Bryan's behavior. They had a whole ass training because of what Bryan was doing. The November 8th, 2022 discrimination and harassment training embarrassed Kohberger in front of his entire cohort, something that Waiver 21 specifically advised against and warned that in a campus setting, problematic individuals are more likely to become violent in the days following a shameful or rejecting event, such as a reprimand, which is literally what I just said. Like, they were on him and he was offended, shameful, felt rejected, felt angry, and then decides to kill 4 students 5 days later. What do you guys think about that? During one faculty meeting, a discussion concerning Kohberger took up most of the time because he was highly problematic. Concern was expressed about Kohberger's behavior around women, including that he was aggressive towards women and made them feel uncomfortable. The WSU staff discussed if or how they could intervene. One WSU professor warned her colleagues at that meeting that Kohberger was a predator. Quote unquote, he is smart enough that in 4 years we will have to give him a PhD. Mark my word, I work with predators. If we give him a PhD, that's the guy that in many years, when he is a professor, we will all hear he is harassing, stalking, and essaying his students at whatever university he ends up at. That WSU professor also believed that Kohberger was already stalking people. Kohberger's supervising instructor at WSU, however, was concerned that removing Kohberger from employment with WSU would open up the university to a civil lawsuit from Kohberger. So they were afraid to be sued by Kohberger and wrongful termination, etc. And they failed for Idaho students and all the other ones that were victims. And now they're having a huge lawsuit by the families, the victims' families. Crazy. Very crazy. Despite numerous complaints about Kohberger's behavior from students, faculty, and staff, WSU failed to properly and adequately intervene or take steps to mitigate and prevent further threatening, dangerous, and predatory behavior by Kohberger. So they never actually fired him. WSU had knowledge of significant problematic and dangerous behavior that would have caused WSU to perform a formal and comprehensive threat assessment on Kohberger. For example, WSU did provide safety escorts to concerned staff and students, evidencing its awareness of the significant danger that Kohberger posed to the Pullman-Moscow community. There is no indication, however, that WSU used its TAT threat assessment, I forget what the last word is, to conduct a threat assessment of Kohberger, or that it employed any of the potential interventions. Had WSU's TAT conducted a proper and comprehensive threat assessment, and it would have readily identified that Kohberger prominently displayed nearly every red flag in their policy manual. For instance, a proper threat assessment would have found, among other things, that Kovberger had characteristics associated with a heightened risk for violence, including anger problems, lack of empathy, and a strong sense of entitlement. A proper threat assessment would also have shown other recognized serious warning signs for violence, including but not limited to that Brian was engaging in stalking and menacing behavior that was escalating and instilling extreme fear in his female victims. He was having increasing conflict with professors and colleagues. He was having increasing problems with his work performance. He was autistic and sexually frustrated. He was preoccupied with violent homicidal fantasies, schmexual burglaries, and serial unalivers. And he was in possession of a K-bar military-style hunting knife. He was using WSU's internet network for improper purposes, such as troubling searches and stalking and planning his attack and murder of decedents, and that he had photos of the WSU and University of Idaho female undergraduate students on his cell phone. Had WSU performed a proper threat assessment, it would have determined that Kovberger posed an extremely high and imminent risk of violence. A proper threat assessment would have required that WSU identify likely targets of any possible violence that Kovberger might commit, including by examination of his cell phone, computers, internet search history, and inspection and search of his university-supplied apartment and office. A threat assessment would have required that WSU identify potential triggering events that caused Brian to commit violence. There's no indication that WSU did any of these things. Instead, for months, it continued in a state of organizational and bureaucratic paralysis while continuing to employ Kovberger as a teaching assistant, continuing to provide Kovberger with housing, health benefits, free tuition, free internet access, and continuing to pay Kovberger a salary and continuing to provide Kovberger with academic studies focused on criminal behavior that fed his preoccupation and obsession with sexual assault and mass murder. That's wild. Yeah, he premeditated his whole actions. Agreed. Kovberger commits mass murder for which was foreseeable to WSU. On the weekend immediately following the November 8th, 2022 discrimination and harassment training, Kovberger commits mass murder, which was foreseeable to WSU. In the early mornings of November 13th, 2022, while he was still employed by and enrolled at WSU, Kovberger stared through the back window of a home at 1122 King Road in Moscow, Idaho, immediately adjacent to the University of Idaho. Yeah, is that proven? Here's the house. Kovberger, masked and dressed in all black, entered the King Road residence by slipping through a kitchen sliding glass door at the back of the home. We've seen these pictures in some of the crime scene photos. This is the door he allegedly went through. Kaylee Goncalves was heard frantically yell in fear, "Someone's here." Kovberger was heard to say, "It's okay, Kaylee, I'm here for you." Note, this could be a straight up lie. I hadn't heard that before. Using a military-style K-bar knife, Kovberger then violently stabbed to death 4 victims that were later identified by police as Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana, and Ethan. Below is a photograph of the victims taken only matters of hours before their murders. The victims were all undergraduate students at the University of Idaho. Police found defensive knife wounds on both Xana Kernodle and Madison Mogen's hands. Kaylee was unrecognizable as her facial structure was extremely damaged. Xana and Maddie had defensive wounds. Kaylee, her facial structure was extremely damaged. This part always gets me. The annotations are made by another true crime channel, Jules. This guy should have been arrested way before. How could no roommates hear? Kaylee was unrecognizable. 2 other female residents of the King Road residence survived the encounter. A surviving 19-year-old resident of the King Road residence reported to police that before the killings, 𝗕𝗥𝗔𝗓𝗏 Goncalves had seen a shadowy figure watching her from the tree line at the back of the residence, which freaked her out. Note, other people also said she was having issues since May of 2022, and the Goncalves already came out and said she didn't have a stalker. The cop said she didn't have a stalker, but she was already having issues since May of 2022. I full-heartedly believe that was Bryan Kohberger stalking her, you guys. That's just my opinion. We haven't gone through all the documents. We're still going to do that later this week, but she had a feeling she was being stalked. Goncalves also had told her family and roommates about a stalker in Moscow, Idaho that had followed her to her car. The 19-year-old resident of the King Road residence also reported to police that she and another roommate were often freaked out at the home because they felt there was someone watching them from outside the back of the window. Joel says, what? Yeah, is that proven? During the time of the murders, the 19-year-old resident heard Goncalves crying and Kohberger telling Goncalves that he was there for her. I don't think that's true. On November 13th, 2022, in the days following, I know that it was alleged that he said something like, it's okay, right? Oh yeah, that was a thing. On November 13, 2022, in the days following, both WSU and University of Idaho sent alerts to their students and staff members about the crimes and potential ongoing risk. After the quadruple murders, but before Kohberger was identified as a suspect, Kohberger's supervising instructor at WSU considered the possibility that Bryan had committed these crimes. Similarly, fellow WSU graduate students also immediately thought Kohberger committed the crimes. Kohberger's office mate and fellow teaching assistant employed by WSU observed a large scratch on Bryan's face, which looked like scratches from fingernails. But we also have the selfie, you guys. So is that true? Other members of the WSU, is it true or did they leave stuff out? But we do see that creepy selfie. Other members of the WSU criminology program also observed wounds on Kohberger's hand following the crimes. None of the members of the WSU criminology program, however, notified law enforcement about Kohberger's behavior or their suspicions about his potential involvement in the crimes. Video evidence led the Moscow, Idaho Police Department to believe that a white Hyundai Elantra may have been involved. On November 25th, 2022, the Moscow Police Department asked Pullman, Moscow area law enforcement agencies to be on the lookout for a white Hyundai. This is a lie. Kaylee's name was never used. Yeah, that's why Jules noted that too. Yeah, it's Jules with crime. Yeah, I agree. In response to this request, on November 29th, 2022, WSU police officer Daniel Tiengo searched a WSU database for white Elantras registered with WSU and identified a 2015 white Elantra with Pennsylvania license plate registered to Kohberger residing at 1630 Pullman, Washington. No apparent action was taken by WSU at the time. So they did a database search and knew he had that car, but did nothing about it. After all those complaints, etc., the Valley Road is an apartment complex that houses WSU graduate students and is referred to as Steptoe Village. This is a picture of it. WSU owns and operates Steptoe Village and had provided Kohberger with a residence there as part of his employment with the university. On that same day, November 29th, 2022, at approximately 1 a.m., WSU police officer Curtis Whitman was searching for a Hyundai and located a 2015 in a parking lot at 1630 Northeast Valley Road. This car had a Washington license plate, but it would also register to Kohberger. No apparent action was taken by WSU at the time. The 2022 fall term then ended in mid-December, and Kohberger promptly returned back to his family home in Pennsylvania. Only after the murders and after the semester had concluded did WSU make the belated decision to terminate Kovberger's teaching assistantship, cut Kovberger's funding, and remove him from the graduate program? Only after the crimes. As part of its ongoing investigation into Kovberger, the Moscow Police Department obtained his cell phone records in an effort to determine if he had stalked any of the victims prior to the crimes. A subsequent examination of Kovberger's cell phone confirmed that he was stalking female students at both WSU and University of Idaho, with dozens of photos of students, many in bathing suits. Jules says this is false, but why would they be putting it in here if it was false? Kovberger's cell phone records also revealed that he had been in the area of King Road residence on at least 12 occasions prior to November 13th. All but one of these occasions occurred in the middle of the night. On one occasion, Kovberger was in the area of the King Road residence on August 21st, 2022, from approximately 10:30 to 11:30 p.m. On December 30th, 2022, Kovberger was arrested for burglary and 4 counts of murder at his family's residence in Pennsylvania. Also on December 30th, WSU issued a press release regarding Kovberger's arrest in connection with the murders. And here's that copy of that press release. Insane. Absolutely insane. In the press release, WSU's chancellor and provost stated that this horrific act has shaken everyone in the region. She further stated that we also want to extend our deepest sympathies to the families and friends, who were impacted. All right, we get it. On December 31st, 2022, WSU served a belated trespass admonition on Brian Kovberger, signed by the WSU Chief of Police, Gary Jenkins, which we will review in the FOIA. And here's a copy of it. Oh, it's included here. To inform you that the trespass from all areas of Washington State University. Yeah, so he's not allowed. December 30th, so after the crimes. Oh, now you want to admonish him from being on campus. Now you want to do that. Just a little too late. I think he had multiple computers and burner phones too, Evie. Based on the documents that are out there so far, there's no connection between that. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, just that much later. And here he is signed. As part of their investigation, law enforcement took into evidence several electronic devices possessed by Kovberger, including a laptop computer, desktop computer, hard drives, and a cell phone. As set forth above, one of the amenities that WSU provided to Kovberger at his apartment in Steptoe Village was free internet access. Okay, we know that. To both his wireless and wired devices. Kovberger had performed many internet searches regarding home invasions, burglary, co-ed killings, and serial killers for assignments, but still creepy. For example, Kovberger had researched a serial killer named Danny Rolling. Oh yeah, we heard about this in the intro. We did. I'm just going to finish reading this document now because I don't want to do another live on it. So I know I have another live scheduled, multiple, for today. So shout out to you guys, but please hit the like button. I would greatly appreciate that. Oh yeah, you guys are like, Melanie, that was way after the fact. Rolling, I'm interested in this case. Danny Rolling. Rolling, known as the Gainesville murder, murdered 5 college students and became the inspiration of the slasher film Scream. Really? I didn't know that. Oh, the GS. Okay, Evie. Oh, okay. He was a slasher film Scream. In the middle of the night, Rolling entered a college apartment through a sliding glass door, masked and dressed in all black, and unalived his female victims to death using a K-bar knife. Chilling facts suggesting that Kovberger murdered his victims in a copycat fashion. Wow. Kovberger also performed internet searches about psychopaths and paranoia. Kovberger searched for porn exclusively involving non-consensual sex acts using terms such as aggressive, forced, rugged, sleeping, passed out, and voyeurism. Koberger's cell phone also contained numerous photos of female students at both WSU and University of Idaho, including acquaintances of some of the murder victims. No connection, Jules says here. But is it? Apparently, in preparation for the unalivings, Koberger turned off his Wi-Fi and cleared his search history. Forensic examiners believe this was an attempt to conceal his location and the potential evidence that would show he was not at WSU Steptoe Village apartment at the times of the schmurders. On his school computer, forensic examiners found that Koberger had made extensive attempts to delete his internet usage for the period of the month before the schmurders. There was evidence that Koberger had been using his computer during that time, but he made attempts to delete the specific details of his use. Forensic examiners believe he was manually cleaning up his tracks in the lead up to the schmurders to conceal the plotting, planning, and selecting of victims that he had performed on his computer online in the preceding months. WSU would have possessed details regarding Koberger's use of the WSU ResNet internet network in the form of logs and other user data on its own servers that would have been unaffected by Koberger's attempt to conceal and delete his browser history. There is no indication, however, that the forensic examiners were given access to WSU's data, which upon information and belief likely still exist unless WSU has deleted it. The FBI would have found it, right? That's what Jules says too. It is reported that Koberger had followed some of the victims on their Instagram accounts and repeatedly messaged one of the female victims who rejected his advances. I kind of believe that though. Like maybe Kaylee did reject him. On May 22nd, 2023, the Latah County District Judge entered a plea of not guilty for all charges filed against Koberger. Pled guilty. Okay, we know that. On July 2nd, weeks before his trial was scheduled to begin. On July 23rd, he was sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms. Following the sentencing, Moscow Police Department in Idaho began releasing portions of their investigative files, which contain interviews with WSU employees, faculty, staff, and students that had interactions with Koberger. These police interviews, along with other evidence, demonstrate that WSU had extensive knowledge of Brian's discriminatory and harassing stalking behavior, beginning as early as the first week of 2022 fall semester. Just these. Count 1, violation of Title X education amendments. I'm going to skip some of this. WSU had the ability to take action against Koberger through compliance and civil rights and title. There was 13 formal complaints. Have we seen those? WSU had the ability to take action, right? And to terminate his employment, eliminate his funding, and remove him from campus, and eliminate access to the internet network. WSU ultimately did terminate Brian's employment and eliminated his funding, but not until after the crime had happened. Only after Koberger's arrest, after the crime, did WSU finally serve him with the trespass admonition prohibiting his presence. Koberger's supervisor at WSU even advocated that disciplinary actions not be taken against Koberger out of fear that he would sue the university, thereby putting the financial interest of the university above the safety of Pullman Moscow community. WSU also exercised significant control over Koberger and the environment in which the harassment occurred by implementing an official policy that tolerated schmexual misconduct, harassment, and stalking, and discouraged complete and accurate reporting of occurrences of misconduct. Evidence also indicates that Kovberger engaged in the stalking and perpetuating acts. WSU also provided Kovberger with free internet access, on which WSU retained the right to monitor usage and take remedial action if used for inappropriate purposes. There are numerous red flags in Kovberger's behavior should have led to WSU to monitor his online behavior. And had WSU done so, it would more likely than not have discovered he was using the internet for inappropriate purposes. Hey, Q, good to see you. Evidence indicates that Kovberger had engaged in stalking behavior of one or more of the decedents for months before he committed the crimes. After the crimes, a forensic examination of one of Kovberger's computers revealed that during his time at WSU, he had performed many deeply troubling internet searches about unalivers, home invasions, co-ed killings, and porn depicting non-consensual sex. He made significant efforts to delete this in the month before the crimes, which forensic examiners believe was an attempt to conceal his plotting, planning, and stalking. Reports indicate that Kovberger had been stalking one of the decedents on social media, and to the extent that occurred through WSU network, it is a violative conduct that occurred on WSU campus. Alarming behavior should have caused WSU to inspect his apartment under the apartment agreement. I agree with that. Numerous complaints raised. His behavior was so extreme, pervasive, and objectively offensive that females classmates would flee the classroom in the middle of instruction. The decedents, all of the victims, all students at a federally funded university in the same community, were also deprived of and permanently denied access to educational opportunities and benefits when Kovberger stalked them, planned his attack, violently assaulted them, and took their lives. Count 2 is negligence. Yeah, they had control over Brian, is what it's saying. Indeed, after the crimes, WSU exercised that ultimate control over Kovberger and terminated his employment, defunded him, and served him with the trespassing admonition prohibiting his presence at WSU. WSU knew or should have known that Kovberger habitually engaged in misconduct in a manner dangerous to others. WSU was aware of Kovberger's repeated instances of inappropriate, predatory, and menacing behavior occurring within days of him first appearing at the WSU campus, and WSU breached its duty of care and was negligent in one or more of the following aspects. 1, hiring Kovberger and bringing him to Pullman Moscow community without conducting an adequate background check and other pre-employment vetting. Interesting, they didn't conduct a background check on him. Not that he had anything, but still. I mean, he did have some theft, right? I mentioned that at the beginning. Failure to discipline him. Count 3, gross negligence again. Count 4, outrage. WSU's acts and omission described herein constitute extreme and outrageous conduct that went beyond all possible bounds of decency and can be regarded as atrocious and utterly intolerable in a civilized community. WSU acted either intentionally or with reckless disregard for the near certainty that emotional distress of some female students would result from the WSU acts and omissions with regard to Kovberger. WSU did, in fact, cause severe emotional distress to the plaintiffs and their families. We're almost done here, guys. Please hit the like button, and thanks for hanging out and being here while we listen to this. Survival claim, 𝗕𝗥𝗔𝗓 Goncalves. The wrongful acts and neglect of WSU, as alleged above, caused or contributed to the injuries inflicted on 𝗕𝗥𝗔𝗓. Prior to her death, 𝗕𝗥𝗔𝗓 experienced extreme pain, suffering, anxiety, and emotional distress and humiliation as Kovberger repeatedly and violently stabbed her to death. At the time of her death, 𝗕𝗥𝗔𝗓 had no surviving spouse, domestic partner, or living child or stepchild. Does have surviving parents and siblings. Steve Goncalves, a personal representative the state of Kaylee Jade asserts a for survival claim under et cetera, for the pain and suffering, anxiety, emotional distress, and humiliation sustained as a result of her injuries. Wrongful death for claim for Kaylee. And I'm sure it'll be the same for all of them. Survival, Maddie Mogen. What a pretty picture of all of them, man. Karen, her mom. Wrongful death for Maddie. Xana Kernodle. Also wrongful death. And then there's Ethan. RIP to the students, man. This is brutal. And his mom is a representative. The next count is reservation of rights. Demand for jury trial. Plaintiffs here demand a trial by jury on all matters so triable. Oh, damn. Signed January 7th of 2026. Sheesh. And again, another one. We just read 126 pages of that document. We skipped through some of the repetitive stuff because, of course, we already know. RIP. Very interesting lawsuit. And I'm wondering how WSU, Washington State University, will respond. And I can agree with everything we read in that document, really, truly. I think they failed the students and the safety of everybody else. How many complaints teachers, TAs, mentors, counselors complained about Bryan Kohberger and recognized the red flags before they did anything about it. Very, very unfortunate. Very, very unfortunate. Anyways, I did get this annotated from Jules. I know there's differing opinions. You know, I think she believes that Bryan is innocent. We've had our discussions about that here before, but we will continue the Bryan Kohberger debacle in Idaho for murder lives because we are still reading through the documents. There's a lot of them. So please hit the like button on your way out. Thanks for hanging out for the last 2 hours while I read through that entire document. I thought I would have to split it up in between two, but I'm glad that we just got right through it. Yeah, don't be slow. Don't be dry hitting the likes. Yes, please hit the like buttons. I know we went a little longer over than I had hoped for this live, but I am going to reschedule the previous lives. The next live is true crime updates. So we're going to be talking about Nick Reiner, Timothy Busfield, and the Ohio 𝗕𝗥𝗡 case. So like I said, definitely turn on your notifications. I will reschedule. Then after that, we do have a Kenzie live scheduled and then some nighttime lives. So hopefully we get to all of those. I appreciate you guys for being here. Please hit the like button on the way out, and I will see you guys on the next one.